Welcome to the last webinar of the Lane Gorman Trubitt Summer Survival webinar series. Throughout this series, our accountants and advisors will provide you with information to make sure your business has the tools it needs to survive the summer. Changes to legislature, tax policy, and a business environment that is constantly in flux can make it difficult to keep your head above water. Lane Gorman Trubitt presents Ken Malcolmson, President and CEO of the North Dallas Chamber of Commerce. This webinar will give you a comprehensive overview of the North Dallas business environment. It was recorded live as a Zoom webinar on August 20th, 2020, and all information was accurate and up to date at that time. There is a Q&A at the end, but if you have any questions, please feel free to email us at askus@lgt-cpa.com.
My name is Kyle Pacheco, and I'm a senior manager here at Lane Gorman Trubitt in the Assurance Services Department. LGT is a mid-sized accounting firm for all sizes of businesses. Even though this is the last webinar in our Summer Survival webinar series, we'll be providing you additional opportunities for earning CPE credit. Throughout the remainder of the year, we'll cover a broad range of topics that are impactful to businesses in the construction, M&D, healthcare, dealer services, real estate, and not-for-profit industries. These events are created to help your businesses grow and thrive, so keep an eye out for those emails and LinkedIn posts for those links to register. If you have any questions about these upcoming webinars or any of the other services, or would like to set up a free consultation to determine how LGT can help your company or organization, please feel free to send us an email at askus@lgt-cpa.com. Today's presenter is Ken Malcolmson, the President and CEO of the North Dallas Chamber of Commerce. As an accomplished executive, Ken has extensive experience in strategic planning and execution, team building, growth planning, and relationship management in the highly regulated and rapidly changing healthcare, wellness, and benefits industries. His involvement with the North Dallas Chamber of Commerce allows him to be engaged in economic development activity and collaborate with the Dallas Regional Chamber and the City of Dallas on their economic development activities. By serving on multiple nonprofit boards, leading the North Dallas Chamber of Commerce, collaborating with various elected officials, and having a passion for our region. At this point, I'd like to turn the webinar over to Ken to provide you with some insightful perspectives on current events in the region and his presentation, The North Texas Business Phenomenon, What Happens Next?
Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate the introduction, and welcome everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to address this group today. Looking forward to a good conversation. I will make a presentation here, but then hopefully there'll be some good questions that we can delve into later on in the presentation. One of the things that I wanted to share with you prior to jumping into the North Texas business phenomena is that my background is actually, as Kyle mentioned, is in the healthcare world, where I've served for 40 plus years as an executive in the healthcare payer space. My most recent experience was the last 10 years of my career. I was the regional CEO for Humana. And from that, I had an opportunity to marry my business background and business experiences with my passion for civic engagement. And so about 3 years ago, I assumed the responsibility of being the president and CEO of the North Dallas Chamber of Commerce, which is a 66-year-old organization that's done a lot of really good things in this community that I could outline a very lengthy outline of great things, but I'm not going to do that because we've got a purpose today, and that is to talk about the North Texas business phenomena. And that's the other thing that attracted me to this role, is what was happening in North Texas. And so as a result, I want to share with you some perspectives on what's happening, what has happened in the past, and then what we can expect as we look out to the future. So with that, let's step back for a second, and Katie, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. Let's first talk about scale, the scale of the region. And the region we're talking about is the SMSA, or Standard Metropolitan Statistical Area, of the North Texas region. It's about a 16-county region, and let's talk about its scale. It's the 4th largest metro area in the United States. So think about that for a second. It's New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Dallas-Fort Worth. We are now, by the end of 2019, we were already at 7.7 million people in our region, growing to an expected population of almost 7.9 million by the end of this year. And the interesting projections by the demographers are that by the year 2050, we can expect that population to double in size and be close to 16 million people by the year 2050. The other census scale is around opportunity, and that's what we refer to as jobs, jobs, and more jobs. During the 2010s, the region added 1 million jobs, and 140 corporate headquarters were relocated to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. In 2019 alone, prior to the pandemic, DFW added 128,000 jobs. That's more than Chicago, Austin, Denver, and Nashville combined. In 2019, our region's job growth was greater than the job growth of 47 states. The three that it wasn't greater than are Texas, California, and Florida. And we've led the nation in growth each year for the past 3 years in growth in jobs. More scale. We have 16 cities in this region, in this North Texas region, with populations of over 100,000 people, 9 of which have populations of over 200,000 people. Does anybody on this call want to guess what the population of Plano is right now? Well, let me tell you, it's 300,000 people. Plano. When I moved to Dallas back many, many years ago, Plano was a small, almost farming community that was just starting to grow. It's now almost 300,000 people. Of the 17 cities in the state of Texas with populations of over 200,000, 9 of them are right here in the North Texas region. Now let me put this into a context for you, the scale that we're talking about. And this to me is really, really very difficult for me to comprehend. Dallas, the city of Dallas, is the same size as San Diego. Fort Worth is the same size as the city of Charlotte. By the way, at the end of this year, Fort Worth will be recognized as the 12th largest city in the country. Arlington, Texas, is the same size as New Orleans. Plano, the aforementioned Plano, is the same size as Orlando. Garland is the same size as Richmond. Irving is the same size as Boise. Frisco is the same size of Salt Lake City. McKinney is the same size as Little Rock. And Grand Prairie is the same size as Fort Collins, Colorado. These are staggering sized communities that have their own ecosystems and are separate and distinct, and making this region not only significant in size and scale, but it also makes it a little bit challenging to manage all of the various needs of the region. Let's talk about the region being a corporate magnet. McKesson and Core-Mark moved their Fortune 500 headquarters to the North Texas region in 2019. That brings the number of Fortune 500 companies in the region to 24, the second most in the country. There are 45 Fortune 1000 companies in our region. Earlier this year, prior to the pandemic, Charles Schwab announced their intention to move here as well from their home base in the Bay Area of California. Here's another one that just stuns me every time I read it. The region has 3 of the Fortune 10 based companies based right here in our region. So, and that's AT&T, Exxon, and McKesson. But here's what's really fascinating about that, is 3 out of the top 10. There's no other city in the country that has more than 1. And New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago now have none. In 2019, pre-pandemic, Uber, Salesforce, McLaren, USAA, Chase, Allstate, Microsoft, and others all announced major expansions here. And which will happen. They have just all been, in effect, put on pause. In early 2020, there were many additional relocation and expansion projects that were being considered. And multiple announcements were right on the cusp of being made right when the pandemic occurred. Let me just close out with a couple of other examples of scale. We have 162 school districts and charter systems in the region. The Carrollton Farmers Branch School District has more students than the Cleveland Independent School District. The Garland Independent School District has more students than the Detroit Independent School District. Again, these are staggering sizes that we're talking about. We have 70 higher education institutions in the region, and 3 of those are Tier 1 research institutes. Pre-pandemic, our 2 airports served over 83 million passengers, and DFW served over 200 destinations. The number of passengers that were served in 2019 in our 2 high-performing airports were greater than Austin, San Antonio, and both Houston airports combined. We are truly an air transportation hub. So let's talk about what's caused that phenomenon. So obviously, the availability and variety of job opportunities in a very diverse economy obviously has been very attractive. Our relatively low cost of living and housing and no personal income tax at the state level has really boosted our economic development activity. Of course, we all are very familiar with our central location and the fact that that's been a great attractor for business. The aforementioned 2 high-performing airports have been great attractors for us as well. The perceived quality of suburban schools has been a real benefit to the region. We have a low median age relative to other metro areas. Our median age is 34 and a half in the region. In fact, that's true all over Texas. 1 in 3 eligible Texas voters will be under the age of 30 in 2022 and during the 2022 election cycle. 5.7% of our workers are in collective bargaining arrangements, much lower than most metro areas around the country, particularly those that are in the Rust Belt of our country. The region has elevated its status as a tech center. We have the 5th highest concentration of tech jobs in the United States. 3,000 firms are headquartered in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. In fact, Mark Zuckerberg was recently asked, "Where are you going to grow?" And his response was, Dallas, Atlanta, and Denver. That's where we're growing. And then, of course, everyone on this call is very familiar with the Amazon HQ2 story and their consideration of the region for this particular, for their potential move of their 2nd headquarters. And as we all know, we were not awarded that business. However, it was a decision that was made that was very close to coming to our region. And it was something that we all assumed was going to happen, but unfortunately it didn't. And when you look back on their decision making, there was a real rationale for their decision. What they needed were high-tech, highly educated people to assume 50,000 jobs in over a 10-year period of time. That was in their RFP. And during the RFP process, they made the decision to compress that timeline from 10 years down to 5 years. And therefore, they made the safe choice of selecting 2 sites, both of which were along the eastern seaboard, that where there is ample supply of highly educated tech talent that they could easily access. And so they made that easy decision. However, in retrospect, because of their challenges in New York City, and particularly in the borough of Queens, they, I'm sure, have regretted that. And we have maintained we meaning the Dallas Regional Chamber and the region as a whole maintains a very positive dialogue with Amazon. And you may have heard in the past week that Amazon Web Services, AWS, will be moving another large contingent of people to their already 2,500 employees that are housed in the Galleria area. So if we move on, though, not everything is rosy. What are the region's challenges? Well, so I think we have to assess, is our low-cost advantage eroding? The question is, we have seen a significant uptick in housing costs, for example, particularly near the urban cores. And so affordability, will it continue to be an advantage for us? We think it will, but is that eroding? Obviously, it's incumbent upon us to maintain our infrastructure and continue to grow our transportation infrastructure. And so that is going to continue to challenge us with the exponential growth that we've been experiencing over the past, last decade. The sustainable trajectory post-pandemic, that's a pretty straightforward proposition. It's very hard to sustain a trajectory that we've been on over this decade since 2010. But that's, again, part of our challenge. This hot summer climate that we have right now and the fact that we don't have any beaches or mountains, will that hamper us in the future? It hasn't to date, that's for sure. It's that business-friendly climate that has attracted businesses to our area. I mentioned earlier about housing availability and affordability, particularly near the urban cores, inside the loops of Dallas and Fort Worth. Will air transportation, business air transportation particularly, become less important post-pandemic? And will that erode our competitive advantage? Who knows? But we're projecting that air transportation will see passenger volume being close to where it was in 2019, probably in 2022 or 2023. The issue of regionalism, I mentioned that earlier. As the region grows, regionalism gets harder. Population and geography are spread out. Let me just give a quick example of that. For those of you who might reside in Collin County, the growth phenomena there is staggering. And in fact, there are some projections that have Collin County having a population of 3.5 million people by the year 2050. If that were the case, it would be greater in size than Dallas County and Tarrant County. So that is something that gives you an example of the growth and the geographic spread of our growth. So this will continue to be a challenge, is how do we get everybody to work together as one region versus looking after our own individual interests in each community. Ensuring an educated workforce will be a critical component of our future success and will be a challenge. Digital disruption will require upskilling and reskilling. And of the top 100 metro areas in the country, the Dallas-Fort Worth area is ranked 30th for potential for disruption. So meaning that people will lose their jobs, but will have to be upskilled or reskilled into other jobs. Another big challenge from an education perspective is that only 35% of our over 25 population have bachelor's degrees or higher right now. That number has to grow, and it has to grow significantly and quickly. And that's why you see the governor having a goal of having 60% of our over age 25 adult population having bachelor's degrees or higher by our bicentennial 2036. We're clearly undereducated relative to many other metro areas. And the Amazon HQ2 story, I think, portrays that very well. And then the one that's really the most challenging of all is the significant wealth and income inequities that are clearly present in our region and specifically in our community. We often use at the North Dallas Chamber of Commerce the 80-20 rule, and that is that 80% of the tax revenues of the city of Dallas come from north of the Trinity River. Yet nearly 2/3 of the geography of the city is south of the Trinity River. If we don't fix that imbalance, we will have significant tax revenue issues, and we'll be property taxing our people out of their homes in the northern sector. So we clearly have to find a way to correct that imbalance and capitalize on the strength of the southern sector of Dallas. We must learn to embrace our diversity and correct the historic inequities that disproportionately impact people of color in our region. And when I say what are those inequities? Well, they occur in the social justice and policing arena. We've got healthcare inequities. We've got educational inequities and leadership inequities. And these are just a few of the areas of focus that really all of our region needs to spend time on. And why do we need to do that? Well, for a business organization, we look at it, this is a business imperative. This is not a moral imperative, although obviously you can make the case that this is a significant moral imperative, but this is really a business imperative. 4.9% of the students in the Dallas Independent School District are Anglo-white. 90% of them are economically disadvantaged, meaning they are on free or reduced lunch. That's our future workforce. We've got to find a way to broaden that perspective, embrace that diversity, and ensure future success of those students. In 2022, from a statewide perspective, Hispanics, 2022, by the way, is 2 years from now. Hispanics will pass Anglos as the largest ethnic population in the state of Texas. If we can't embrace that, we're not capitalizing on an economic engine and the workers that are going to be needed for our future success and the future business phenomena of this state. How do we ensure that all people in this community, how do we ensure that they come along as part of this North Texas business phenomena? We need all the qualified workers we can get. And we haven't even addressed immigration. And that's why our chamber spends a lot of time advocating for sensible immigration solutions. And I could go on and on about that topic, but clearly that's also a challenge. So the last challenge that I'm going to hit on real quickly is the fact that we are facing significant budget shortfalls at the local, state, and federal levels as we head into the next legislative seasons. So that will really stress all of us as we look forward to the future. So for example, in the 87th state legislature that's coming up in 2021, the state will be facing a budget shortfall for the current biennium of $4.58 billion compared to a pre-pandemic surplus of $2.89 billion. So obviously a $7.5 billion swing that's occurring just because of the pandemic. Well, I shouldn't say just because of the pandemic. We also have also been suffering from an energy crisis as well. And so the two of those have, is a blow to our economy here in Texas. Now, I will say, relatively speaking, we're still doing great compared to many parts of the country. But I do think it's important for us to at least acknowledge the fact that much of our attention during 2021 will be figuring out how to deal with these budget shortfalls at all jurisdictional levels. We'll be fighting the headwinds of the pandemic throughout 2021. So where are we today? The Dallas Regional Chamber, who does incredible work for this region, is really our economic development engine. And they're still, to this day, tracking 85 total projects of potential corporate recruitment. 53 of them were launched before March, and 32 have shown interest since March 13th. That includes 2 Fortune-ranked corporate HQ locations, large distribution and logistics centers. I'm sure you've all been following those throughout the community. Amazon just recently opened a 1.2 million square foot distribution center in the southern sector. Significant expansions of notable tech companies, and a food manufacturer considering southern Dallas County right now, their actual headquarters in southern Dallas County. So these are major activities that continue to occur. And I think we need to look at why. Why do they continue to occur in spite of the great challenge that we've all been facing relative to the pandemic and the uncertainties associated with it? So it really gets down to the fundamentals really haven't changed. The competitive dynamics and advantages are still in place for Dallas-Fort Worth and Texas. We really, the advantages that we talked about earlier, we still sit in a very positive position. And we're convinced that the Dallas and the region will emerge strong from the pandemic. We'll continue to be attractive to companies who are concerned about density issues. We talk about density. We think that we might have a dense urban core in Dallas or uptown or the areas around the city. We are not even dense at all relative to a New York, a Chicago, a San Francisco, and other communities. We have so much geography that we can capitalize on. And so when corporate relocations are being considered, they're looking at less dense environments. And that's why an environment like the Deep Ellum or the Cedars are very attractive to companies, particularly tech companies, for corporate relocations. Dallas's brand as a major tech hub has been elevated. If you date back to the Toyota relocation, that started the process, but since then, Uber, Salesforce expansion, and the Facebook anecdote that I related to earlier. Our tech brand is really elevated right now. And then last but not least, DFW will appeal to manufacturers and distributors seeking to reposition production and supply chain closer to top markets, having our central market, our central location being a real advantage. So I must say, Katie, if we can go on to the next slide, optimism. That's how I want to conclude this, is that I'm still very optimistic. The Dallas Regional Chamber is very optimistic. Most of the jurisdictions throughout our region are very optimistic about the decade ahead. And that's in spite of the many uncertainties and challenges associated with the pandemic. There are significant quality of place investments that have positioned us really well. I mentioned the airports, obviously, but let's talk about things like the Arts District in Dallas, the largest contiguous arts district in the world, and is very attractive. The entertainment district in Arlington, with the ballpark and the AT&T Stadium and Six Flags and everything else, very, very attractive. The Collin County phenomena, and particularly the Legacy West development, as well as the Frisco $5 billion mile. That area has got great potential for future and continued growth. So those have positioned us very, very well as we look into the future. Our education investments and our reputation is growing as a great incubator for educated students or educated workforce. As it grows, I think we will continue to be able to capitalize on that. We're doing some really great things in the DISD right now. DISD is held out as an example of the best practices for urban education almost throughout the country, definitely within the state of Texas. So education improvements and investments that have been made, particularly at the state level through HB 3 in the last legislative session, have really positioned us positively for a future ahead of us. And I think it's also important to note that and I'm going to specifically relate to the Dallas County Community College District, now called the Dallas College. That Dallas College now educates close to 100,000 students per year. And they are doing some really good things in terms of matching the needs of the business community with the skills that are being developed within their curriculum. The other thing that I have to mention is that Dallas has always been known as the can-do city. And so I think the can-do attitude will continue to be sustained even as we continue to grow. And we have always had civic leadership that is willing to step up and really take significant action to ensure that our future is secure. And I think it's important to recognize that we have got a great civic leadership team that's in place that's helping us work through the pandemic with a focus on initially saving lives and then ensuring that we had hospital capacity, and then last but not least, working to ensure a strong economic recovery, particularly for small businesses. And then last but not least, our region is quickly developing a reputation as an international hub. And I think that's been very evident with many of the entities that have moved here. And it's also enhanced by the strength of DFW Airport. So not only are the people that I work with at the community level optimistic, but I personally am incredibly optimistic about the future of the region. And I think hopefully I've given you some food for thought today, particularly in terms of scale and in terms of our strengths here in this region and how we will be able to capitalize on those as we look ahead to the future. So thanks for your time today, and I'll be glad to answer any questions that anybody might have. And feel free to move. I don't see anything in the Q&A right now, but if anybody would like to ask any questions, Katie, I'm sure will be able to manage that for us.
So will the uncertainty around the outcome of the election, will that affect anything in the region?
Not, I mean, yes, obviously it'll affect a lot of different things, but let me just harken back. I've spent a lot of time, just even the last 2 weeks, I've spent a lot of time with Rob Kaplan, who is, I've been on multiple calls with him, who is the president of the Dallas Fed. And he often states that, of course, the Fed is not allowed to be involved in any kind of political discourse whatsoever. And, but one of the questions that we posed to him was, when you do your financial modeling, do you model for a Republican victory and Democratic victory, or do you project? How do you assess what's going on? And while he couldn't really get into much detail, he said, in effect, they're modeling for anything. And yes, I mean, obviously the impact could be significant one way or another. But right now, we're looking at this as we are a local community. We're a community that's focused on what's happening at the local level and within our region. And that's why we push so aggressively and advocate so aggressively for voter engagement, because what happens at the local level is much more important has a greater impact to any individual that's on this call or any call that we have. It has much greater impact than what happens at the federal level on yourself. So that's why we really promote voter engagement. And by the way, if you're not aware of this, we have some of the lowest voter turnout in the country. And in fact, the state of Texas was ranked 50th in voter turnout across the state. And recently it moved up, and now we can be very proud and say we're ranked 48th in the country in voter turnout as measured, as you know, by the turnout and voter engagement. So, so to answer your question, Katie, I don't think that kind of uncertainty, it causes consternation over the next 75 days. But I think come November 3rd, it's full speed ahead, regardless of who's in power in Washington.
Awesome.
Now, I will say one thing real quickly, and that is there's a much greater impact of what happens at our state level. There are significant things at stake at our state level. The outcome of that election, the margins of those elections can have a profound impact. For example, as you all know, we are what is referred to as a trifecta state, where our governor, our House, and our Senate are all currently all Republican. And the House is 9 seats away from being flipped to being Democratic. So that is a lot of eyes are on that. I'm not suggesting that that's the outcome that everybody wants. I'm just simply saying a lot of eyes are on that. We don't have a current Speaker of the House right now. That will have a profound impact on what happens in the 87th legislative session, which begins in January. So there's a lot of really important moving parts that are happening right now at the state level that are impacted by the elections on November 3rd as well. And then the last comment I'd make about November 3rd is that if you go way down the ballot, if you live in the city of Dallas, or I should say within the Dallas Independent School District, there will be a $3.7 billion bond issue election on that ballot, which we are going to be advocating for very aggressively. But that will be a very important decision to be made as well. That will be the largest bond election in the history of the state of Texas, municipal or any county or school district in the history of the state of Texas.
I do see a couple more questions in the Q&A from some of our attendees.
Okay.
So what are local chapters or chambers doing to help member businesses impacted by the pandemic closures?
Well, it's, yeah, the local chambers have been very active in particularly providing resources, um, particularly when it came time to applying for the PPP loans, and then providing those resources to help uh, answer the questions around forgiveness of loans and things like that. We have been working diligently with the Dallas Revive Fund, which is been basically run by Trey Bowles and the Dallas Entrepreneur Center. They've been doing great work. They've raised about $3 million to help small businesses work through some of the issues. Dallas Forward, which is an initiative that was created by Mayor Eric Johnson and his administration. They incorporated in there as the Dallas Revive Fund, but there are also many other actions that have been taken within that Dallas Forward plan that are focused exclusively on small businesses. And then we at our chamber are spending a lot of time actually shifting our programming to focus on small businesses and what they can do to help withstand the effects of the pandemic. But let's face it, there are going to be many businesses that will be going out of business that or already have, and you know, it's interesting. Chambers are feeling the impact of that as well. There's some predictions that 30% of all of the chambers throughout the country will no longer be in existence post-pandemic.
Wow. How will the state generate revenue to make up the $7 billion in length of time?
Yeah, so as you know, our state legislature only meets once every 2 years, and so their budgets are 2-year budgets. They make a biennial budget each time, and so that's $7 million. There's many things that are being considered, including things like, well, first of all, state income tax is a non-starter. That will not happen. But there are things like franchise taxes and other ways of generating revenue, motor vehicle taxes, other things like that. But some of the things that are being considered are things like, I hate to use the term, but Medicaid expansion, which would then also provide significant increase to our coffers. How about this? This is probably going to be pretty controversial, but legalization of marijuana. That could obviously generate revenue for the state as well. And then last but not least, don't forget that pre-pandemic, we had close to a 10 or $11 billion rainy day fund. So in aggregate, we feel pretty good, relatively speaking, going into this legislative session. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to get much else out of it other than trying to figure out how to close this budget shortfall.
So what initiatives are the NDCC advocating for in the legislature to address the high cost of higher education?
Well, that's, you know, if you look at there's a lot of initiatives that are occurring right now at particularly our state-supported institutions and community colleges. And some would say that particularly if you look at our community colleges, if you qualify, there's no question that you can get a free education. So this whole concept of high cost of higher education in the community colleges is really a moot point. However, when you get into the 4-year institutions, particularly our public schools, there's been a lot of pressure being put on all of the governor-appointed trustees of these institutions, both the University of Texas system, Texas A&M system, and the state system, that all of them have had a lot of pressure put on them to ensure a low-cost education is provided. And then, of course, there have been significant fundraising that's been occurring in order to help try to close the gaps, particularly for those who are economically disadvantaged. And I think you'll see that that's the case, that financial aid is at a much higher level than it's been for many, many years. And so that, I think, is helping close some of that gap.
Thank you. We have two more questions. So with many companies utilizing working from home options during COVID, do you think this will impact large companies' decisions to relocate? Meaning, why relocate corporations if folks are working from home and it won't matter where the office is located?
Yes. And obviously, almost every company is giving that some consideration right now. There's this balancing act between the benefits of being together with your coworkers and the creativity that comes from that, and the ability to communicate clearly and more succinctly, etc. That is a benefit. But on the other hand, there's no question that we're seeing, the pandemic has shown us that we can be very efficient in a virtual environment. And does that mean that we'll need lesser space? And will we actually move back into the office environment? So I think the balance there, though, is that the office environment of the future will be less dense. And so as a result, the space needs may be just as great, just with fewer number of people, and maybe a shared work environment and things like that. But there's been a lot of discussion about that. Every major, I don't know if anybody on the call, but every major national real estate firm, that like the CBREs and Cushman and Wakefields and the JLLs and the KDCs and others, they all have developed these plans and designs for the workplace of the future, as well as all of the engineering and design firms have done the same thing. And so there's been a lot of discussion on that. You can pretty much go to any virtual environment and find information about it. But yes, I do think that ultimately that will have an impact. But again, we still expect to see corporate headquarters be in place, and we think that Dallas-Fort Worth will continue to be a good magnet for them.
Great. So how does mass transit fit in the DFW region as compared to our regional/metropolitan competitors?
Yeah, well, we'll never have the mass transit capabilities of a New York or Chicago or San Francisco. But relative to those cities that we compete with in the Sun Belt, there's no question that we have built out, well, DART particularly has built out a very nice system that we can, and the length of which is one of the longest in the country. And we will be able to capitalize on that. And we think that it's going to have a very positive impact. When big corporations are considering moves to an area like Dallas-Fort Worth, one of the reasons why they like the core area of Dallas-Fort Worth, like I said earlier, Deep Ellum, Cedars, Uptown, is the access to mass transit. And so many people are, I know several executives of major corporations here in Dallas that have chosen to just give up their cars. They live in apartments in Uptown, and their offices are either in Uptown or downtown, and they don't even have cars. And so this is an environment that we're not used to. We live in a car culture here. But nevertheless, mass transit is going to continue to be very important. And we have done a relatively good job compared to our Sunbelt competitors.
Well, thank you so much, Ken, for that great presentation. And thank you, everyone who participated in the Q&A. We love to see that. We love interacting with our presenters.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Everyone have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us. Please make sure to follow our events page for more information. The link is in the description below, along with other important links, including our social media. If you want to see more Lane Gorman Trubitt webinars, subscribe below and hit the bell icon for notifications.